The tail wag can mean so many different things. When the animal is in a positive emotional state, they will swing more to the right. Dog wagging with a predominant left wag tends to be associated with negative emotional states. If the tail slows down, that can be a sign that the dog is about to attack you.
Dr. Karolina Westlund, an animal behaviour expert.
Dr. Karolina Westlund.
So one of the things about dogs' fear of thunder is that it's not just the sound. It's probably a combination of the sound, vibrations, changes in barometric pressure.
How do you manage their fear?
There's at least 30 different approaches that you can use. One thing that strikes me when it comes to how people deal with unwanted behavior in their animals is how they narrow in on the unwanted behavior. How can I stop this behavior? Rather than saying, why is the animal showing this behavior?
Which animal is more intelligent, the cat or the dog?
Oh, you want to go there?
Karolina, what is the science of ethology and what does it mean to animal lovers?
I think this is one of the areas where people don't realize how useful the science of ethology might be. Ethology is essentially the study of behavior. So most ethologists will, traditionally they would go out into the forest and, use their binoculars to look at some animal species and more or less document what they were doing. Or you would study animals in a laboratory facility and you'd either just provide them with, good living conditions, so it's easier to study what they're doing because this can be quite strenuous. But using applied ethology is when we take what we've learned from studying wild animals and we apply that to captive animals, such as our pets, laboratory animals, zoo animals, or farm animals.
From the ethological perspective, what are the 3 most important aspects to consider to help our pets thrive?
So what we're doing essentially when we have pets living with us is that we're taking an animal species to live under certain conditions, and we're removing them from those conditions, and we're sort of having them live with us in our weird world with our strange rules that we've just come up with that often don't make sense to the animals in our care. And so often there's a mismatch in the types of lives that they evolved to live and what we're offering them now in captivity. And it's specifically within 3 areas where it gets really problematic. And one of those areas is the social system that they evolved to live in and the types of social interactions that they have, how they manage conflict, whether it's typically in a wild population of animals, there will be mechanisms in place that reduce the risk of inbreeding, for instance, because inbreeding typically leads to reduced fitness. In other words, how well and effectively you live and deal with threats and so on. So most animal species have some type of inbreeding mechanism, avoidance mechanism established. And one of these inbreeding avoidance mechanisms is that it tends to be either the males or the females that leave the group where they were born. Which means that if the males leave the group where they were born and the females stay together, that tends to lead to females getting along really well with other females. Generally speaking, there's always exceptions, right? Generally speaking, that females get along rather well and that males don't get along very well. And vice versa, if it's the females leaving home and the males sort of stay together, then it's the males that get along better and the females that don't get along better. And in some species, both sexes leave the nest or the group where they were born, and so there might be conflict both between males and females. But typically also what happens in the wild is that animals tend to, so they either stay in the group where they were born, or they migrate and form some other social structure, but they stay in that social structure for a very long time. So they're not that used to meeting strangers, or they don't have they're not adapted to interacting with strangers very often. And so often what happens when we, then the humans, we're like, well, say we want to have horses and we we'll buy horses from different places and we'll put them together in a group, and then the horses need to manage being in this new social environment with strangers, and perhaps they're all of the same age, perhaps they're all of the same gender, and they need to manage conflict, and they need to figure out who's who in the dominance hierarchy, and so on. So the social structure of the group can be really a source of tension and potential conflict. And I think that we don't give that enough thought when we get another dog to our already existing group of dogs, or we try to put two male rabbits together who in the wild would never form a natural social group. So keeping male rabbits together is one of those things that's really difficult to do because they evolved not to spend any time together. Just understanding more about the social system of the wild will help us predict who's going to get along with whom in captivity, and what we might do to mitigate social conflict, and also how we might go about introducing strangers in a way to minimize the risk of aggression.
I love that you make us think so deeply about our pets, about our animals. When we as human beings go to a dinner party with our partner, we sit around at that dinner party or at the barbecue, we analyze the other couples that are there, and we get back in the car on the way home, and we'll say to each other who we like, who we don't like, and we have our reasons for why we like certain people and why we don't like certain people. How are animals coming to those conclusions in their social groups?
One thing with animals is that they tend to like whoever they grew up with. And whoever they grew up with tends to be relatives. And so we have this concept of kin selection, or sort of that you tend to behave more collaboratively with individuals that you're related to, because your interest, it's within your interest that they do well, as opposed to individuals that you're not related to, because you share genes with individuals you're related to. So just from an evolutionary perspective, natural selection or kin selection will then ensure that you behave more appropriately. So you collaborate, there's less conflict, there's conflict resolution, so there's reconciliation. So if you have a conflict, you tend to reconcile it if it's with kin. And if it's with individuals that you're not related to, there's less reconciliation after conflict. So animals tend to do better with other animals that they grew up with, but they also tend to do better if they grew up with a socially competent mother. Because if mom is socially competent and relaxed, so if mom feels safe, she can then dedicate a lot of her attention to her offspring, because she doesn't have to be vigilant and sort of look around for danger all the time. But she can dedicate attention to her offspring, and her behaviors, to her caregiving behaviors to the offspring, will have epigenetic effects on the brains of the offspring. In other words, she will program the brains of the offspring to be prepared for living in a safe environment. And if you get that type of treatment, you will sort of grow up expecting good things to happen. So being sort of like an optimist, that when you meet new individuals or strangers, that you will expect them to be friendly and nice. And by contrast, if the mother lives in an environment that is stressful, so that she might be, there might not be enough food around, or there might be predators around, or there's conflict, and so she needs to be sort of vigilant and pay attention to what's going on in the environment, then she doesn't have enough time, or she doesn't prioritize giving that extra level of care to the offspring. She will, in fact, in some cases, she will cannibalize the young. So like female mice, for instance, if they are in a stressed environment, they give birth and they kill the babies and eat them. And then they have, then they have sex and they have new babies like a couple of weeks later. But so that's, in fact, that's an adaptive behavior. So it's a behavior that will improve her lifetime reproductive success if she does that, because then she won't invest in offspring at a point in time where there's huge risk in the environment. But what this tells us is that if mom doesn't feel safe, her offspring will grow up with a brain that's geared for being prepared to live in a stressful environment. And those animals tend to be more pessimistic, and they tend to be less friendly towards strangers and so on. So I think those two things would be the biggest explanatory factors in how animals behave towards others is sort of their genetic predispositions depending on which species they are, and also how they were mothered.
Karolina, I want to ask you about how animal communication differs from our own communication, how humans interact versus animals. Is it similar to us, or have we got it all wrong?
There are some similarities, but there are lots of differences also. And I think one reason being that we are very vocal. We are sitting now, I'm in Sweden, you're in Australia. We're communicating mostly verbally, although I'm also gesturing a lot.
Yeah.
Animals also communicate verbally, but their language isn't at all as intricate as ours, even though, there's been studies showing that certain vocalizations actually do have specific meanings. So, for instance, vervet monkeys will have different warning signs or warning sounds depending on whether they're warning their friends, their other monkeys, about a snake. That's one sound. About a predatory bird. That's another sound. Or whether it's a leopard or a human. That's a third sound. And dogs have different types of barks for different contexts. So we do learn a little bit about their emotional state and their intention through their vocalizations. And they also communicate through pheromones. So a type of smell or scent that they give off. They have scent marking areas on the body. Sometimes in the cat, it's in the face and underneath the paws, and also the anal glands in dogs and so on. So they will scent mark, rub their scent on different areas, and they'll communicate to each other a lot of information about their age and gender and sort of reproductive status and so on through these scent marking exchanges. And these are pheromones, which means that typically it's only the same species that can perceive that species' pheromones. So we humans cannot smell these smells. So cats can smell cat pheromones, dogs can smell dog pheromone, and humans can't perceive any of that information. So that information is completely underneath our radar. What we can do is pay attention to their body language. So they will often communicate their emotional state and their intentions through their body language. So what we can do then is we can look at their TEMP, TEMP. So T is for the tail, whatever the tail is doing. Yeah. And that's, the tails have very different stories depending on whether it's, it's a cat tail or a dog tail or horse tail or some other tail that we're looking at. So that's T for tail. Then there's E for eyes and ears. So typically ears will flatten to the skull when animals are frightened or when they're dealing with physical threat. It's a way to sort of protect the tissue from damage. The eyes will typically, that's a bit different for different species, but many species have this sort of narrowed gaze or half blinking or half closing of the eyes as a signal of pleasant emotional states. Many species will have like a fixed staring as an aggressive behavior, which also means that many animal species are really concerned where we look them in the eye, especially if we're like staring hard at them.
Yeah.
So that's something to be mindful with certain individuals. If you feel that they're uncomfortable when you look directly in their eye, that you maybe should look at their shoulder or something instead. So that's TEM is for mouth, what the mouth is doing. So whether the mouth is relaxed or whether you can see the little muscles being tense, whether it's open or closed, and so on. TEMP, P for posture, what the body's doing. So often animals will, when they're at ease and relaxed, the body will be loose and the muscles will be loose, and they will tense up when they're slightly fearful. And we often don't even notice that, this freezing behavior, when they're like completely still and immobile, they're not moving. That's often a first sign that something is a bit uncomfortable. And it's very general across different species, this type of behavior. Many animals will crouch, so they'll just lower the body to the ground when they're fearful. So cats and dogs will do that. Horses will not. So we need to pay attention to what their bodies are telling us about their emotional states and their moods, their underlying mood state, and their emotional reactions to things going on in the environment. And interestingly, so there's been studies of faces and the facial muscles that move in different combinations when we're showing different facial expression. And interestingly, dogs and humans move our facial expressions different, or facial muscles differently for different emotional states, which means that we are likely to misinterpret dog facial expressions because we look at dogs and we think that they're furry humans, but they're not. We're better at predicting or labeling the animal's emotional state if we look at the whole body than we are if we're just looking at the face, unless we're very skilled observers and sort of so if we have lots of dog experience, then we learn to read dog expressions better.
Which animal is more intelligent, the cat or the dog?
Oh, you want to go there? Yeah. I think that, cats and dogs evolved under completely different selection pressures. So they're really smart. Cats are really smart at being cats, and dogs are really smart at being dogs. And I think that, if we're looking at, we define intelligence often as, the thing that you measure in an intelligence test. It's actually, so it depends a bit on how you choose to define intelligence. But I would say that one thing about dogs is that they co-evolved with humans to some extent. So it's very likely that humans, when dogs or when wolves started living with us and they started first sort of hanging around in the outskirts of human habitations, and we started interacting with them, that we changed as a species and they changed as a species. So it's like a co-evolution. And that part of that co-evolution is a very strong tendency for social interaction across the species. So dogs are really, really good at reading human body language and indeed also understanding many words. Well, cats have retained much more. They're essentially unchanged from the feral sort of ancestral cat before domestication occurred. So they retain much more of their ancestral behavior traits. They have the whole hunting sequence, for instance, whereas many dogs today or dog breeds no longer have the whole wolf hunting sequence. But as to who's the most intelligent, well, I I wouldn't know where to put my hat with that one.
Yeah.
I don't want to offend neither the cat nor the dog people. Yeah.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. I want to ask, I've got my dog Vader in here today, and you mentioned something about the tail wagging that I want to go back to. I always assumed that when you see them wag their tails that they're just always excited to see you, but is that the case?
No.
Okay.
So the tail wag can mean so many different things. And I would advise you to sort of get to know the dog in front of you.
Yep.
So how he expresses his emotions and intent through his tail, because it's going to be individual, but it's just some general pointers to help you
Yeah.
sort of start that journey. Is that tail wagging is one way to communicate how they feel. So typically it's both about the carriage. So where is the tail? Is it high? Is it horizontal, or is it low? So generally the high tail tends to be alert, being assertive and being confident. The medium tail, especially when it's moving in big swings, tends to be the sort of friendly, relaxed tail. The low tucked tail tends to be the unsure or fearful tail. And it also, different dog breeds, their tails look really different. So this is just like some very general pointers, but depending on the breed, the tail might be up more or less all the time. Yeah. And also the amplitude, so how big the swing is and how fast it is. So fast swings tends to be associated with high arousal. So that low, fast swing is typically high arousal and sort of unpleasant emotional states. The medium, big swings tend to be friendly, engaged. And then if the tail slows down, that can be a sign of uncertainty. It can also be a sign that the dog is about to attack you. But also, it's been noticed that sometimes dogs tend to wag their tail going up and sort of quick. And that's also associated with aggression for certain individuals, which is why I'm suggesting that you pay attention to your dog.
Yeah.
There's also one really interesting finding was that dogs tend to wail asymmetrically. In other words, if you're looking at the whole swing of the tail, there will be an asymmetric swing. When the animal is in a positive emotional state, they will swing more or a higher amplitude to the right. So the way that study was done was that they show the dog their owner, and the dog would do really big tail swings where the pendulum to the right was bigger than the left. So big tail swings like that. And then they would show the dog a stranger, and there would be the amplitude would be smaller, but still there would be this right bias. And then they would show a cat, and they would still see this right bias, but the amplitude was even smaller.
Karolina, with the amount of knowledge that is in your mind about animals, I'd love to know how it feels for you to be around animals and what that lens is like for you. Is it like for us watching Madagascar, the cartoon, or The Lion King, where you've got all these different personalities coming out of these? Like, is that how you're seeing the animals when you're around them, or how are you seeing animals when you're around a group of, I guess, if you're at a zoo or something like that? Do you see them completely differently to the way that we would see them?
When I see these Disney movies, I always think that they're like, they very often portray animals as living these uncomplicated lives where the zebras and the lions are great friends, and they're singing Hakuna Matata and sort of, singing and dancing together. While the truth is that lions actually eat zebras, and it's in behaviour. I see this great anthropomorphism. So we're telling a human story. It's just that we're we're letting these cartoon animals play out the roles of the humans. Anthropomorphism is a great risk, I think, but we think that humans are sort of like furry, or that animals are sort of like furry humans, and that they, if we just love on them, everything is going to be all right. But often when we show affection in what's natural to us, which is we're primates, so we like hugging, for instance, is that we're doing this. And this is in fact a type of restraint that can be really scary for some animals, because that type of restraint is associated with being caught by a predator. And as actually we started off this conversation talking about the three things that I find are the most important from the ethological perspective with regards to keeping animals with us humans. And that's one of the other things, is that so the social dynamics is one issue. Another issue is, how do we help animals deal with what is to them fear-inducing situations? So how do we prevent fear, and how do we help them manage fear? And the third bucket out of these three is, how do we help them behave in a way that's natural? So how do we look at, we often look at their behavioral repertoire in the wild. So what do they do all day? How do they spend their time? And specifically, how do they get food? Which senses do they use? Which behavioral sequences do they use? Do they cache food and come back for it later? Do they eat? Are they constantly nibbling throughout the day, like horses who eat like 16, 17 hours a day? Or are they more like lions who will gorge themselves every fifth day and then eat nothing for the rest of the time? This way of anthropomorphizing animals is that we assume that they're humans when they're not. And the other risk, I think, also is anthropodenial. In other words, that we don't realize that they actually do share similarities with us humans, or that we humans share similarities with animals. So I think there's both the risk of anthropodenial and anthropomorphism. They live in a world that looks completely different from us. Many animals are colorblind, for instance, or have very limited color vision compared to humans. And they, their sense of smell is extraordinary, some species, and some species' hearing is also extraordinary. So they perceive the world really differently, and we must acknowledge that. But we must also acknowledge that we share many similarities. And this is, for instance, that when we share these emotional systems, so we'll have the fearful reactions when we're exposed to situations that could be potentially life-threatening, or that we perceive as potentially life-threatening. That's I think the problem, because many dogs specifically, and around now, what date is today? It's the 23rd of June today. I mean, the 4th of July is coming up now in the USA, and I know that that's the time of year when most dogs go missing because of the fireworks. Because they become really fearful. And one of the behavioral responses when you're fearful is freezing, as I discussed already. But another one, when there's higher levels of fear, is fleeing. So it's running.
It's interesting you mentioned the fireworks. I know even with my dog Vader, she's really scared of thunder and lightning. And it's something I'm trying to teach her not to be afraid of. But it's quite difficult when they hear their sense of hearing, like you said, is far superior to ours. It's almost like she can sense it's going to happen. Is there a way to, is that the right thing to do? How do you manage their fear?
That's a whole course onto itself.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a resource that maybe we can share with your listeners also. That
Sure.
I wrote like this huge blog post with everything that you can do to reduce fear of thunder in dogs. And there's like at least 30 different approaches that you can use. So one of the things about dogs' fear of thunder is that is not just the sound, probably. Thunder or fireworks. It's probably a combination of the sound, the vibrations. There might be changes, and when it comes to thunderstorms, there might be changes in barometric pressure. It might be the lightning or the the visual stimuli associated with it. So and this is what makes it difficult also, is that it's so many facets of it. And ideally you have to help manage the fear of every single one of these. But typically what I would advise you to do is to, first of all, if it's really bad, I would say don't hesitate to contact a veterinarian who could help with some medication that will take the edge of it and also make the fear more manageable, and so that the animal will then respond to behavioral modification techniques where you can help the animal relax in the presence of fireworks. But I'm not sure whether this is the right forum to go into that, because it's
of course.
Well, we can definitely share your blog for sure.
Yeah, we'll put that in the link in the bio.
We'll put it in the link.
I've actually got a scenario for you that's very specific. We dog sit a little fella called Leo, who's very similar to Vader. So his owner actually flies in and out to Dubai. So there's a bit of he's with us, he's away kind of situation. This is the scenario that plays out for us. At 5 o'clock in the morning, my wife and I, we get up and we go to the gym. And he gets this separation anxiety. He just starts barking as soon as he starts to realize that we're about to leave. And that barking, we can hear, we're in a unit block, so we can hear that barking going on as we go out to the car. We can stand outside, he's still going. So we assume he's going for at least 15, 20 minutes. And in a unit block, that's not a great idea when you've got other people getting angry. So we have come to the solution of getting up in the morning, grabbing some food, putting it in his bowl, and then my wife and I piss bolt out the door, get in the car and go for it. Is that the solution? Is there another way to get around that with when it comes to a dog's anxiety?
I would think that is not the solution.
Yeah,
actually, and that is also one of these huge areas where there's a lot to discuss. So managing separation anxiety takes a lot of work. And if his owner, if you're just dog sitting and the owner is like
away,
coming in and out,
yep,
it can be complicated, because essentially in order to help a dog get through that type of reaction, we need to help them learn that being alone is not a bad thing. And it also can be that that what's actually going on is that he's so depending on the types of behaviors shown, the type of intervention might be slightly different, because some dogs get bored when they're alone and destroy things. Other dogs get sort of fearful and get worked up about outside stimuli, and others feel a separation really badly and don't like being alone, so they panic at being alone. So depending on what the issue is, the approach might be slightly different, but overall, it's about making sure that the animal feels okay with being on their own. And that is often a very time-consuming process to do that. And you would need professional guidance through that.
Can animals smell our emotions? Is there a link there?
I think so, absolutely. They can perceive our emotions, for sure. Then if it's through the sense of smell that they mostly do that, I don't think we know the answer to that. I know that dogs can smell testosterone and cortisol and so on. And I know that when we are in different emotional states, we have, so depending on our mood state, our physiological state and our nervous system will be geared towards different actions. So when we're fearful, we'll have more cortisol, we'll have higher adrenaline and so on. And I know at least that dogs can smell the cortisol. But we're probably also sending out other information that's sort of underneath our radar that we don't know so much about yet. Whether it's through our facial expressions, our sort of micro expressions, whether it's our breathing frequency, or other behavioral signs that we're not paying attention to.
We all love our animals, and you have dedicated your life to studying animals. Where did that come from? How did you make that decision?
actually a very deciding moment, I think, for me. So when I finished high school here in Sweden back in 1989, I got a book as a sort of graduation present by an ethologist called Konrad Lorenz. And that book stayed on my shelf for years, actually. I didn't read it for a very long time. And then I picked it out and read it and was mesmerized by it, because he was one of the early ethologists, and he lived with birds. So he would hatch geese, and those geese would imprint on him, which means that they would sort of look around, look at him and say, oh, there's mum, and they would follow him around anywhere. So he would be out kayaking and they would swim behind him. Or later on, they would be out flying and he would come out to his lawn and they would all land around him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was fascinated by this. And that's when I sort of decided I wanted to study ethology. And then later on, actually, I've had several of these like eureka moments, or these moments where you find some new information that just makes you go down a rabbit hole and that changes the direction of your life. So this was one of those occasions. And another occasion was when I first stumbled on Panksepp's work, Jaak Panksepp, an Estonian scientist who studied emotional expressions in animals. And one of the things that he did was that he tickled rats, and the rats would laugh. But it's just that we can't hear the laughter because it's ultrasonic. So we need to have like a bat detector to record the sound and bring the sound frequencies down so we can hear it.
Right.
Wow.
But he studied emotional responses in animals, and to me that was a huge puzzle piece of sort of understanding better motivations and decision making in behavior, and how much emotions impact animals' personality development and how they turn out, because these early life emotional experiences really determine whether we become optimistic or pessimistic, for instance.
Which animal is the most exciting to study?
I find octopi really, really fascinating. Squid.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Yeah. Wow.
What can you tell us about octopus?
Not very much. I guess I had almost a religious experience once when I was in Thailand back in 1985. I was out snorkeling, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by a school of squid, and they formed a perfect circle around me. And I was treading water like this with my leg and just circling around and watching these squids, like they formed a perfect circle and they were all watching me. And I felt like we had some sort of
moment,
meeting. And then it wasn't until afterwards that I realized that, what was that friendly? And I still don't know the answer to that, whether it was that, because I experienced it as a friendly or sort of curious friendly interaction, but it could have been a threat for all I know, because I know that some animal species will sort of gang up to mob potential predators, and but they swam away, so it never escalated to anything. But no, I think one of the things that I find really interesting is with octopi is that they're really, really intelligent and there's no social learning.
Okay.
And to me, that's mind-blowing, because all the really, really intelligent species, there's a lot of social learning. So you watch others of the same species, you grow up with humans, you grow up with parents and siblings, and you sort of learn together. With octopi, they're like, they hatch and they're on their own. And they discover everything on their own. There's like, they invent the wheel. Every single octopus invents the wheel, so to speak. And they're really, really intelligent. I find that really interesting.
Karolina, we like to end every episode with our guests sharing something, an object that is important to them. Do you have an object that you'd like to share on the podcast today?
I do. I brought out this one. Can you see what it is?
Is that a brush?
Yeah, it's a brush. For whom, you think?
Ooh, I'm going to go with cat.
Yeah. It's a cat brush. And I brought it out because my cat, Oscar, he likes people. And he's social, and he's very sort of confident and outgoing and friendly, but he doesn't like cuddling, much to my
Oh, yeah, that
but
would break my heart.
Much to my sorrow, I'd love to just go, but he doesn't like that. But he does like the brush. So this is sort of the way that we can both be happy about our physical interactions, is that he not only tolerates the brush, but he will actively seek it out. He'll go, woo, and come running if I bring out the brush. And then I can brush him and I can love on him a little bit, and he's happy about that. Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, that's sweet.
If someone's made it this far into the episode, they've loved every minute of this, what would you want to say to that person that is listening to this episode right now who loves animals as much as you do?
Well, there's a lot to learn. As I just mentioned, that I've been on this learning journey for a long time. And nowadays I do a lot of teaching online. So if you want to go on this journey with me, I'm sure that you will be sharing some of that information here. So I'll see you perhaps on my webpage or Facebook then.
Karolina, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.